Hi, I'm Marty. I flew these with these, fly these with these, happy life, and then Corona. I started this channel to put out two messages. You are not alone, and a day with a laugh beats a day without one. So pull up a pew, you're amongst friends. Relax, laugh, or cry with me. Hello YouTube land, back here at work. I'm off to work now. First day back. I've had over a month off, so this will be the third time I've been stood back up, and I think that pretty much goes for most of the crews short haul on the 737 in Perth. We've been stood down, stood up, stood down, stood up, stood down, stood up, and that makes us the lucky ones in the entire company. Most other short haul bases have not fared as well. They've spent a lot more time stood down and on JobKeeper payment, and only a month or two stood up, if that. Some bases in particular, I'm thinking Adelaide, particularly been hammered by that, and obviously now Melbourne. Long haul, latest news, long haul, they offered 196, I think it was, voluntary redundancies were offered, and that was mostly subscribed. I think they got 180 odd applications. So that'll play out in the next couple of weeks. Starting to become familiar going back to work after having a month off. Getting those mental gears working. I was just chatting to my mate on the phone this morning, and he suspected that I'm getting what's called ground happy. And that means you sort of really slip into that being a normal civilian, not thinking about flying at all while you're stood down, which I think he's probably pretty accurate on that one. So what I plan to do now is get to the car park about almost an hour early, and I'm going to sit there and just go through my recalls, just mentally prepare myself for going back to work, read all the flight standing orders, make sure I'm very familiar with the NOTAMs, and then just mentally fly the flight. Luckily today I've got a very easy flight comparatively out to Cal and back, and what do you know, it's a beautiful blue sky day over here in Perth. Clear skies both there and back. To top it off, I'm flying with probably one of the most polished first officers in Perth, Chris Pegram. Shout out to you, mate. His dad was a jumbo pilot, and that makes me a pretty happy camper for today. And in fact, I think I'll fly with Chris for the rest of the month. I'm just going to film snippets of today, not the flying part. I'm just going to never film the flying part. I'm not interested in dragging our airline's name down by showing you my flying, but I think that road's fraught with danger. But certainly I want to let you know how I'm thinking before and afterwards. So I'll talk to you now, and then talk to you after the flight and with my impressions of being back at work, and I'll continue to do that for my flights. I think I've got a couple of Cals and then a bunch of Darwins, and I feel very blessed to be doing that. I think this month we had a little over 23 pilots in both categories, so 46 odd stood up in our base. So just a little over half of us. What I learnt from last time I was stood up after being stood down is slow and steady wins the race. So I'm winding my pretty conservative operation even further back. And I think that's very, very apt and consistent with what's going on right now. I hope you're going well. I hope you're finding some normalcy in all this madness. It's getting on towards half a year now, isn't it? Half a year of us enduring this, and now they're talking stage 3 vaccination trials, so starting to trial these vaccinations over much greater numbers of people, and Australia's certainly reserved some of the rights to be producing that in Australia from Oxford, and also the University of Queensland working on it. But I don't know what you're reading, but I'm seeing no realistic idea of that happening till early next year. So it's quite likely this thing's going to go on for over a year. How have you found your spending has changed? I've been spending way less, and when I do spend, I've been much more careful about how expensive the item is that I buy. Classic example is if you're having a bottle of wine for the evening. We've even moved over to the Shadow cardboard. What do you know, it's not that much worse. So how has your spending changed? I'm finding that it is realigning and refining what I think I can retire on, and certainly out of this I'm interested in having zero mortgage and getting to a point I can retire as soon as possible, and very much let me choose when I retire, not financial circumstances decide when I retire. I'm starting to think 60 rather than 65 would be a much better idea for me, which is probably good news to all the first officers in Perth. Had a lovely experience last Friday, just at the end of my month of being stood down. We went up to the Pierce RAAF base, the RAAF base here in Perth in West Australia, where they do all the Air Force training, and they have a lovely tradition that 100 courses on from the course that you graduate from, you get to attend another graduation with all the students from 100 courses on. So I graduated from 158 pilots course, and 258 pilots course just graduated. The other bloke I went with was Space, my mate Jason. He went to Orion's off pilots course, earned himself some medals in Iraq, and also ended up being the head of the flying school over here as a wing commander. So he pretty much ran the base over there for all the students who were graduating. So he's intimately involved in flying and flying instruction. He got up in front of all the crowd there on the Friday night and gave a long speech on behalf of 158 pilots course. It was a very nice speech, saying that the two main things are to trust your gut and to also know that the friends that they've made on that course will be friends for life, and probably will be the main thing they get out of it, other than a wonderful career. And then that went for about 5 minutes, Jason's talk, and then I got up and I thought it needed a bit of levity, so I got up in front of all the students and I stared everyone down. I said, I have over 17,000 flying hours, so I hope you'll listen to this next bit of advice. If you're thinking of getting a tattoo, now's the year to do it. And that went down pretty well. My point with that joke was, they are young, their entire future's ahead of them. Don't die wondering, go and do it. Because it was funny being there as a 50-year-old and being there as sort of the guest of the parade. You realise that very much I'm an elder statesman in the world of aviation. At 50, your career's more than 2/3 gone. These kids are only 20, 22. Most of them weren't alive when I became a pilot in the Air Force. And that very gently rubbed my nose in just how old I am and how far along the journey I've come. And maybe the end is a little closer than I imagined. Another highlight of going up to that RAAF ball was to sit and talk to my very good mate Ray, who's an instructor, and he's been doing 20 years. I found out 20 years he's been an instructor up in the Air Force. He got a special deal. They wanted some continuity of experience up there. Normally you only instruct for up to about 2 years. He's been doing 20 years of it. And I was reflecting on not so much the students, but us, as in our careers have been very much fractured. And I asked him, not advice so much, but just what he thought about that. And his way of easing any sort of distress in that situation, he said, very much think back to a time in your life when things were very simple. So for him it was when he was being a baggage handler at a major hotel here in Perth and just getting tips and enjoying life as a very young 20-year-old before he joined the Air Force. No cares, no responsibility, no mortgage, no family, but he was really happy. And he said, in reflection, what he has now is he's got a mortgage, sure, and he's got a career, sure, but he's also got a wonderful family. He's got kids that amaze him every day. He's had amazing experiences in his life. He's got, sure, financial pressures, but he's also got a lot of money and assets to his name. And he said, in most respects, his life is actually better than that time when he was a single kid hauling bags at the hotel. And he said, if you really look at it, there's no reason why you shouldn't be happier now, even with this COVID-19 experience. I thought that was pretty right on the money. It's just a matter of perspective. And sure, you might have to sell your house. You might have to change your job. But life goes on. And I know that's very easy for me to say as I truck out to work for my next month of standing up. But if I find myself longer term having to sell the house, having to move out, having to change jobs, or even retiring early, I think I'm going to keep that perspective that overall I've got it pretty good, even now. I made a suggestion to one of the management guys the other day. Here I am going out to Kalgoorlie and back. Some of our second officers and in fact our first officers and captains haven't flown for getting on towards half a year. I thought it might be good I would very much welcome having somebody sit on the jump seat on the next flight out to Cal. I don't know how, the logistics and the legals all behind getting someone who stood down to come back to work for a single voluntary day of flying are probably diabolical. But I just thought overall if there was some way they could achieve that, that'd be pretty marvellous. And I don't know a single techie that's flying that would not welcome that. And as we all know, an extra set of eyes on the flight deck, certainly in times like this, are always welcome. So we'll see if that gets up. Last time I spoke, I've been pushing the scales at greater than a tonne of weight, about 103 kilos. I've dragged that down to 100. I am doing exercise pretty much every day, and my God, it makes you feel good. Been playing pretty hardcore for the Wembley Vets, go the Vets, playing in their senior squad. I managed to get a goal the other week, which was just absolutely the highlight of probably 2020 for me so far. And all the boys in the club congratulated me on my first blood as a seniors player, being a complete novice at the sport. I've discovered I'm very good at catching the ball. I still got to remember to call it marking. They tend to bat their eyelids a bit whenever I call it catching. But I'm not much chop at kicking the ball. And I just spent the last hour of this afternoon down at the local park kicking about 100 balls trying to remedy that. And I'm quite hopeful of next Sunday when I play. So to keep you involved in the flying wise, I've already read the NOTAMs for today. Cav okay here in Perth, southerly wind. Kalgoorlie, bit of a westerly, southwesterly, so normally we slide straight in on runway 11. Tonight I'm thinking it might actually be from overhead runway 29. Remember the bold old days in the classic 737 where we'd sprint out there, descend at about 330 knots, DME arrival into a circuit for a circling approach, black hole at the end of the 29 there over the super pit, and then land the aircraft on the smell of an oily rag. I'm sure the guys that were captains in 1960 felt very comfortable, but our times have changed, Dave. So tonight, definitely it'll be just a 280 knot descent, OCTA, and then probably the R&P onto 29. We'll get the ATIS out there. I've already looked at the weight for landing, about 60 tonne, because we've got about 90 people. So I have looked at the case with 15 knots of tail onto that runway to make sure I know that we'll be okay. And it can pull up with max on the auto brakes, but not a lot of fat there, surprisingly. We're not at max landing weight, but with the tailwind onto that runway, she's only 2,000 metres long, and if you float at all, it's pretty much give it away and have another go. Only a couple of interesting things in the NOTAMs, the main one being they're taking out one of the two emergency locator transmitters from the aircraft due to a battery problem on. They haven't got enough batteries, so they're spreading them out, so spreading the load. So each aircraft now will only have one ELT, which is a bit different, and something to note to the cabin crew, because they're probably expecting to see two. It's good to see all those red tails as I drive in. Oh mate, score, there's a spare park there, wonderful. So I'm sat here, I've just sat here for about 20 minutes and done all my just final refresh of all the stuff that we use every day when we're going flying. I know I've already talked to you about it. I went over just my problem solving model. I've gone to all my recalls, just remembering them. I put all this in a little folder and it's just such a good little quick refresh. Then all my manoeuvres, stall, ground proximity warning system, RATA, upset, nose high, nose low, wind shear and land and ditching impact drills, and finally my rejected takeoff stuff. So worth going through just to brush the cobwebs off, because as we know, the reality of the job is an hour and 5 minutes from now, Chris and I could be facing a rejected takeoff for real, and with real people's lives at stake. And that's the weight we all wear on our shoulders. I know that there are pilots better than me that are furloughed and approaching half a year off. And if I think about it too much, it actually does my head in. So I have to ignore that. What I do know is today, those passengers will have Chris and I on board, and we've got one big thing going for us, and that's probably integrity. And that's the thing that I think mostly is shared by all of the Qantas pilots. That's probably the number one thing I notice about all the Qantas pilots is the integrity of the entire pilot group. And that means everything from we make a decision, for example, 7 tonnes of fuel, we have the integrity to not only check that the 7 tonnes on board, but to know that the 7 tonnes on board. I've probably harped on it before. That's my hand on my heart rule. And it becomes really important on days like today when you haven't been flying for 35 odd days and you've been up and down through this COVID stuff. When things are going well, occasionally I'll discuss that with guys I fly with, and certainly one of the main things I've learnt out of my flying career is the concept of the hand on the heart rule. So, and the way I demonstrate it is if they're doing checks or something, and my mate Gibby did this as well, you can put your hand over one of the switches that he's just announced is, for example, in manual, and you look at them and say, hand on your heart, for real, for keeps, is that switch in manual? And it's not trying to be a pain in the ass. What it's trying to do is impress upon you what integrity actually means. And we're all human, so we have to fight for that integrity. And I am just as fallible as the next guy. In fact, I know that, so I have to operate to allow for that. That's what I see in all Qantas pilots, is they have that integrity. They do have that hand on the heart rule. The trouble is, day after day, repetitive 4 sectors a day, year in, year out, tries to erode that integrity through, you start to get very comfortable with it. But that's the discipline in being a long-term airline pilot. It is that monotony, that repetition, that you still have to maintain that high level of integrity. And it's extremely hard to do, and it requires very much an esprit de corps. It requires a depth of a training organisation. It requires management that cares about that outcome, and it's rarer than you'd think. So today is a day on which I will be very slow to ensure that that integrity is there. So that's the sort of mindset I'm heading out of my car after brushing up my skills and go and buy Chris a coffee. Hope that wasn't too serious, but I reckon this stuff's worth talking about in these times.
Trip out to Kalgoorlie, very quick, under 45 minutes flight time, 150 knot tailwind. Very normal flight, just one bit of traffic as we arrived in Kalgoorlie to do the R&P approach. A Velocity aircraft was departing. He was outbound on the 237 radial, so definitely a confliction for us. We made a verbal contract that we wouldn't descend below 7,000 and he wouldn't climb above 6. Problem solved. Happy days.
So, survived our first landing back into Kalgoorlie. Chris has been at work for the last month, so his eyes definitely in. He flew the beautiful approach in here, bit of a 10 knot crosswind and great landing. I'm going to say a whole bunch of other things about getting back to work and just the things that catch you by surprise again. But the one thing that I want to really point out is what a pleasure it is to work in a team again with somebody who's professional, well-trained, good attitude. It's such a pleasure, and it's probably the thing we forget, but the thing we value the most. Just in that really rarefied atmosphere of the quiet cockpit during an approach, and just, it's like playing music with somebody that's really good at music. It's just a pleasure. So just finished the day, Kalgoorlie and back from Perth. Just lovely to be back at work, obviously. It's the little things that you forget. Just the little things like you taxiing along on the little bumps and the way the wings slightly rock on taxi, listening to other aircraft on the radio, just seeing your own shadow as you take off, looking out the window and you note your own shadow. Little burble as you increase with 150 knots tailwind on the climb out of Perth towards Kalgoorlie. And the sunsets are just amazing. They're probably the thing I'll miss the most when I do stop flying. All the safety stuff, all the training stuff, all the standardisation stuff was all there, came back. But it's all those little things that you forget, and they're all those little things are all the bricks that make up the wonderful thing that is our job. And the thing that was the best was just that sense of teamwork again. And I mean that in the most genuine way. Chris, the first officer, is just a gun. And just to be back in that environment, that adult, quiet, highly skilled environment where everyone's respectful, everyone's positive and assertive and quietly confident. It's just a lovely place to work. On the ground, on the turnaround, we had 2 or 3 things that almost held us up. First thing was one of the cargo door handles was a little bit sticky, and the ground staff were right at doors closed, came up to tell us about it. So I had to then go back outside the aircraft and have a look at it. In the end, it was okay, but we definitely got the engineers to look at it on arrival into Perth. Then one of our passengers lost his wedding ring on the tarmac, and there was a bit of an emu march along the apron to find this man's wedding ring. He was visibly shaken on losing his wedding ring. He'd been cleaning his hands with the antibacterial stuff due to the COVID-19 caution sort of stuff, and we found it. We found his wedding ring. He was so relieved. And then after all that, we got away on time, and then something happened that totally summed up what I was talking about before I went flying. And I'll tell you about that now.
So we're taxiing out. We've got about 155 people on board. We have to backtrack down the runway, making all the standard calls. There's no air traffic control in these places, so the whole thing's based on the concept of see and be seen, and transmit and listen. On that note, we're sitting there and we hear Kalgoorlie traffic, taxi. We tried to raise the aircraft several times to no avail. No response. We just know somebody was taxiing somewhere in Kalgoorlie. Now, radios can be problematic. There's a large hill between us and the threshold of runway 18. Sometimes light aircraft make taxi calls even after they've started taxiing. Sometimes their radios aren't up to scratch. But what I'm worried about, and what the first officer's worried about, is night time. You can't see the whole runway. If we start rolling and he's rolling on 18, we could end up meeting in the middle. The worst aviation disaster in history at Tenerife had exactly this happen. So there we are at the end of the runway in Kalgoorlie. There's an aircraft taxiing. I don't know what he said. I don't know where he is. I don't know where he's going. I don't know if he will conflict with us. I can't see the entire airfield. It's night time. A lot of don't knows. I'm not happy with this situation. So my question to you, dear viewer, is what would you do? For the non-flyers, I want to impress upon you that this is not a dangerous situation, but it has the potential to be dangerous. This is the sort of stuff that is our bread and butter. It's risk mitigation, and it's dealing in a fluid environment with risk. It's where you do need to have integrity. Also, I want to keep the guys that aren't flying involved. So I put to you guys, what would you have done? The solution that Chris and I came up with satisfied the requirement that we had to know that that aircraft that made that radio call was not a confliction anymore. We had the option of taxiing back up the runway and having a look ourselves in the middle of the night, or we elected to call our operations room at Kalgoorlie. They got a car with an airfield officer to come out and inspect the runway. But all that took 20 minutes and delayed the aircraft. But at least then, when we took off, we knew we were okay. Yeah, so first day back at work. That was my day. I can't wait to see you guys back at work. Remember, you're not alone. Thanks for watching, guys and girls.
Yeah, that'll do.